range of activities like the restoration of historical sites, microfinance, education and overall development. Your Highness, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to interview you. Now, the Aga Khan network has done work all over the world.
Yes.
What's the idea behind this work?
Well, I think the nature of the role that I have requires me to look not only at issues of faith, but at issues of quality of life. And therefore the Aga Khan Development Network was an attempt to create capacity to improve quality of life of the peoples in the countries where we work. And it's a system of agencies, it's not one agency, because as time has gone by we've found different needs, and therefore we've tried to be field driven so that we have a network of agencies which can work together in any relationship as is required, whether it's a post-conflict relationship, whether it's a post-colonial relationship, whether it's countries that are coming into a federal relationship. We have to adapt the relationships of the agencies to each circumstance. So that's one aspect.
So, Your Highness, when you speak about quality of life, does that mean that you actually choose a place where people are not living very well, and you try and give them something better?
Yes. We are field-driven, and we look at parts of Asia and Africa where we hope we can be effective, where the network can come together. And one other characteristic of the network is that it's not a banking system, in the sense that the network commits without time limit to the processes of change. Most development agencies have a different way of working. They lend money.
That's right, and it's for a period of time.
Exactly.
Only.
Whereas we don't work in a set time frame. Sometimes there are problems, or the need to create change will take 15 or 20 years. And then you have to create institutions that will do that work.
Right. Well, we're just in front of the citadel of Aleppo. Why did you choose the Aleppo citadel to do your project?
Well, what has worried me, frankly, is that one of the downsides, at least from my point of view, of globalization is the disappearance of identity.
That's right.
And I think disappearance of identity is very dangerous. And I was worried that we would suffer disappearance of identity within the Ummah. And therefore, in trying to enhance the pluralism of the identities of the Muslim world, it seemed important for us, amongst other things, to enhance the value of cultural assets that have come to us from history, but use them also as a trampoline, so that people in the Ummah become creative in their own terminology, in their own value systems, with their own symbols. And therefore we're working not only in looking at the past, but we're also trying to work with young people in various areas to tell to them, create according to your own value system. You don't have to copy other people's value systems. Modernization does not mean Occidentalization.
That's right. And usually the copies are just quite bad copies that have no significance in this area of the world.
Well, one of the things we found, which was absolutely amazing when I started the Award for Architecture, we looked at the schools of architecture in the Islamic world. And it just sounds unbelievable. It is true. There was not one single professor who had been educated in the Islamic world about Islamic history and art. They were all formed in Western schools of architecture.
That's actually...
It's stunning.
It is, absolutely, when we have something like that. Can we talk a little bit about your project for the Azhar Park?
Yes.
Just to move from Aleppo to the Azhar Park.
Well, in looking at this issue of enhancement of cultural assets and bringing them forward, one of the biggest challenges which the Western world has addressed, which we have to address, is whether we are moving these assets forward with resources that become productive for society, because they have to become productive. And what we were able to do with the Azhar Park was we were able to use the creation of the park as a trampoline for social change in Darb al-Ahmar. And there are about 200,000 people, ultra-poor people, who live in Darb al-Ahmar. And so the notion of making significant commitments to cultural assets is to not only enhance them, but enhance their role in economic and social development of the populations that live around. We think that around this project, there are about 100,000 people who will be impacted by the economic outfall and the social outfall of what we do here.
And it's just seeing work all over the world, basically. It seems to be a continuing effort. I'm not talking only about the work of the network, but in a larger and more historical frame. You continue work that began 1,000 years ago, like in Cairo, you know, what was built by the Fatimite Caliph. You came 1,000 years later to beautify it. Is this a trend that you follow?
In a certain extent, it's a trend, because essentially we're working in Asia and Africa.
Yes.
We're working in countries where we've had a long-established relationship, or where there is a new relationship which is important. And it can be partially driven by the presence of the Ismaili community, but it can also be driven by regional constructs. Central Asia has a regional construct which is moving forwards. Eastern Africa has a regional construct.
Do you have projects in Central Asia?
Oh yes, very much so.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
In Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan,
Okay.
Afghanistan.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you believe in public-private cooperation?
Very much so. Very much so. I think we lived through the 60s and the 70s in a conflict of dogmas, and that paralyzed a lot of processes. And I think today there are some areas of development which have to be dealt with at the national level by the government. There are other areas which are best handled by private initiative, and not necessarily initiative for profit, just private initiative, civil society.
Yes.
And the two really have to work together to be effective. And so I very much encourage the notion of dialogue, public-private discussion. I think it's highly important. The notions of conflict between the private sector and the public sector is something I hope will never come up again.
Would you say it's difficult to actually find that point where both parties are happy?
I think it is. I think it is a question of will. And then it has to be adapted to each type of situation, because it's going to be different if it's in the economic sector or the cultural sector.
And talking of the economic sector, you've already got a microfinance program in Syria, and soon you're going to be launching the first microfinance institute in Syria. How do you view the role of microfinance in society? Our
involvement in microfinance started in rural development, because what we found was that by using microfinance in rural environments, we were able to give village communities financial resources that they could use for their own development. And then we found that this whole area of microfinance, which in simple terms is lending on trust,
That's right.
is an extraordinarily powerful way to support poor people in many different ways, because it can be for education, it can be for health care, it can be for cultural rehabilitation, it can be for commerce. There are practically no limits, because there is no notion of pledging assets.
Oh, right.
You see? So it's a question of trust between the institution and the individual or families or whatever it may be.
And you must have had many success stories out of this.
I think of it as one of the most powerful and least developed instruments to deal with poverty. And I think that we'll be able to move from microfinance into microinsurance. I'm hoping that one day we'll be able to say to thousands of poor families, come together in a common program, and we'll find a way so that you can finance the education of your children, protect yourselves from ill health. And at the moment, poverty is such a massive force of destabilization, of lack of hope, that it's affecting millions and millions and millions of people. And one of the domains of that is lack of access. You see, very often poverty is thought of in material terms.
Yes.
It's not.
No, it isn't.
No. Poverty is lack of access to quality of life.
That's right.
And anything you can do to change that really has a massive impact.
It's sort of enlightening.
Yes.
It's enlightening
Yes.
people,
Yes.
absolutely. In your opinion, can architecture be a way of expressing Islamic culture?
It has been since centuries and centuries, and that's not specific to the Islamic world. Architecture has been often expressions of faith. It has been expressions of ambition. It has been expressions of power. It has been expressions of how would I call it, of hope. It's very interesting in the sense that it's the only art form that affects quality of life. It is the only one. There's no other one. And people, when they have a beginning of improvement of quality of life, the first thing, or one of the first things they do, is to improve their housing. So that sort of momentum towards improving the physical environment is part of human society.
But do you think actually that now, like, Islamic architecture is not to the forefront as it was before?
Well, as I said earlier, I think we tended to go away from our roots.
Yes.
And we have to come back to our roots, so that the relationship, for example, of space to place, the symbols of Islamic architecture, that there are enormous numbers of factors which influence our environment. Construction materials, land values, and what we, I think, need to do is try to make sure that, for example, public spaces, which have always been a very powerful element of our environment, and indeed the Quran itself refers to our duty to pass on an improved quality of environment. And so public spaces are important. Water is a symbol.
Water is a big problem, actually.
Is a big problem. The height of the minaret is a very important issue.
Yes.
And so these are the sorts of things that we need to remember, to reflect upon.
Does the Aga Khan network do anything in the way of promoting Islamic architecture on an individual level? Let's set aside big projects like the one behind us.
Well, when I started the award for architecture, we had a number of seminars in the Muslim world, and many of the architectural communities and the building communities said to us, fine, we understand the problem. We like the way you're approaching it, because it has to have a multiple approach. But let's get away from dialogue and move into action.
Okay.
Show us, don't only talk to us. So we then entered into two areas. One was education, where I created this program at Harvard and MIT in Islamic architecture to train younger generations. And the second thing we did was we looked at specific situations, which was essentially the historic city. And the historic city is a development process, not only a cultural process. The historic city is, generally speaking, a concentration of the ultra-poor. Because there are many factors that cause that. But so if you impact a historic city, you're first of all impacting the quality of life of the ultra-poor. Then you're reviving a cultural asset. Then you're learning what has caused the degradation of the environment and what you can do to stop that happening elsewhere. So there are many lessons there.
In your speech at the opening of the Citadel yesterday, you spoke about the Ummah, and you spoke with a lot of nostalgia, I thought. How do you feel about that, about the fact that a lot of the cities, as you said, 1/3 of the cities listed in UNESCO actually are from the Ummah?
Right.
And now they're not in a very good condition.
Well, I think there are a number of factors that the Muslim world and others don't control. One is the phenomenon of urbanization. That is a process.
That's right.
You can slow it up, but you probably can't stop it. So one of the features of slowing down the urbanization process is improving the quality of life of the rural environments. In most of our countries, the populations are between 70% and 80% rural.
Right.
In industrialized societies, 1.5% of the population produces 100% of the agricultural output. So I think that what we have to try and do is accept the notion of urbanization, but do it in such a way that we improve the quality of the urban environment. And in our societies, the open space has always been a major feature, particularly of high-profile monuments. So when you talk about the citadels, when you talk about mausolea, you talk about mosques, very often they're extraordinary environments. And look at, for just one typical example is the Taj Mahal.
That's right. That's right. That's an amazing place.
It's an amazing place. And that is also taking symbolism from the Quran that has been translated into the concept of the space around.
That's right. You always say in one of your speeches that we have to look back in order for us to look forwards. And how does your work rejuvenate Islam and help Muslims face the modern challenges that now they are facing?
Right. Well, I think first of all, we need to, I don't mean to be pretentious, but our history within the Ummah is massively pluralist.
Yes.
And I think the first thing we need to do is recognize the incredible value of that pluralism.
It's a very important point, the pluralism of Islam, which people don't really speak about.
Well, you know, because our history, our peoples are pluralist, we benefit from the talents of all these people, all their histories. But in order to do that, we have to accept that within the Ummah there are differences. But that's the same of any society, Christian societies and others. So pluralism to me seems to be very important. The second thing that's important is social values. Because in Islam the relationship between deen and dunya is different than in the Christian world. The ethics of Islam impact everyday life.
That's right.
And we have to try and keep that as a fundamental value of the Islamic world. I don't want to see a situation which I've seen or I see in other parts of the world where faith becomes something which you access on certain opportunities and the rest
when you choose. You best.
Exactly.
When it serves you best, absolutely. You speak a lot about the clash of ignorance.
Yes.
And that seems to be a much, much better way of describing the clash of civilizations.
Yes.
Can you just elaborate?
Well, I think that if you look at modern education has been driven in the last centuries essentially by the Judeo-Christian societies. And because it's been driven by Judeo-Christian societies, the presence of the Islamic world and our history, our philosophy, in the knowledge base that is coming from the Western societies is not there. We're absent.
Yes.
And being absent causes an enormous vacuum of understanding, of appreciation, of respect. And I think it's up to us to now make a much greater effort to illustrate the extraordinary history that we have, the fact that we accept pluralism, the fact that we have great philosophers.
How can we prove that, though? It seems to be such a difficult job.
Yes, it's difficult because we're moving against long-established historic trends, but that's not a good enough reason not to do it.
I want to talk a little bit about Syria. You do a lot of work in
Yes.
Syria, and you speak about the speciality of Syria. You say Syria is a special place.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about this?
Well, my academic studies were in Islamic history, as you probably know. And when Islam expanded out of Arabia, one of its first areas of interfacing with non-Muslim societies was in Syria. And it was the first contact between the Muslim world and an established Judeo-Christian society. And it resulted in enormous quality of life and even at times theological partnerships. For example, in the areas of mysticism, etc. Because at that time it was the East Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire. So historically, Syria was one of the very earliest situations in which Islam came into contact with non-Islamic established societies. So it's one of our earliest case studies.
How did your visit go, and how was your meeting with the President?
Well, I would like to take this occasion to thank the President, the First Lady, the Prime Minister, the government for the wonderful support they've given us to work in Syria. I hope that AKDN will be one of the contributors towards progress in Syria. And
do you have any future projects in Syria?
Oh, very much so, because...
Can you just tell me briefly?
Yes, certainly. Well, what we want to do, because the nature of the Aga Khan Development Network is a multi-input system, we'd like to impact areas of Syrian development, not just one. And therefore we're looking at support in education, we're looking at support in healthcare, we're looking at support in economic development, we're looking at support in cultural development, we're looking at support in economic development. So the agreement we had in 2001 established the relationship which gave us that potential. And now we're looking at a rehabilitation of this whole area around the citadel. We're looking at expanding
So it would be new housing and things like that?
Well, first of all, we'll continue to work on the citadel. Then we will be working on the public spaces around the citadel. Then we'll be working on the creation, a conversion into a hotel in the area.
Right.
We're going to develop an extraordinary set of buildings in Damascus, historic houses, into a boutique hotel. And
that would be in old Damascus?
In old Damascus.
Right,
And there, for example, the goal is to teach foreign visitors about our culture.
That's right.
I think that reviving culture is a way of illustrating your history to people who don't know about it. And so that's what we'll be doing. We'll be extending microcredit massively and developing new areas, collaborating with some of the First Lady's initiatives also. So that's also what we're going to be doing.
And just at the end, Your Highness, is there a message that you would like to give the Syrian people?
Well, first of all, the respect and admiration that I have for Syria and its historic role within the Ummah. Secondly, the notion that progress does not mean occidentalization. Progress in the Ummah means moving forwards in quality of life, but not giving up your identity, not giving up your value systems. Indeed, our value systems are massively important for the future.
That's right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.